Previously in Nomifactory edition of Minecraft Java edition, I had extracted extremely valuable titanium and blah 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 from all ores possible to create extreme voltage machinery and send more mining missions into the microverse. This all led to the widely anticipated launch of my upcoming space station masterpiece in Minecraft, which was easier watched than said than done. Putting everything I had on the station was a separate Brobdingnagian challenge, fit only for the fittest of gamers. I had good news, however. Space stations did not always have to be stations. As I was saying a duration of time ago, it was time to move everything on Earth onto the space station that I had launched in episode 7. But I lied. Because a few durations of time before that duration of time ago, I was extracting tungsten from the scheelite and tungstate ores obtained from the Tier 2 multiverse mining mission. But why? In real-life reality, tungsten is used to reduce the firing rate of SWDM-11/9 submachine guns. But in Greg-type technologies, tungsten is one half of the tungsten steel alloy, which is the base material for insane voltage machinery. This insane voltage technology shall be further developed after I set up my base in outer space. But first I wanted to at least get a tiny bit of tungsten. In order to mass-produce tungsten I would first have to grind the tungstate ore into pure tungstate dust, but I already had a system for that. The tricky part is dissolving the tungstate dust in hydrochloric acid for this yellow tungsten acid with a hint of some lithium chloride. This yummy acid is then electrolyzed to obtain pure tungsten with a hint of hydrogen and oxygen. That was when I realized that since this lithium chloride had chloride in its name, I could separate it to get full chlorine refund, which can be recombined with this hydrogen to recreate hydrochloric acid. Meaning that the tungsten processing chain could hypothetically infinitely recycle hydrochloric acid, so the tungsten ore is the only input that is consumed forever. So to set up the tungsten extraction chamber, I would need 2 extreme voltage chemical reactors and 2 extreme voltage electrolysis chambers. I then hooked them up to a brand new extreme voltage power grid and proceeded to place down all the machines. The tungsten ore dust shall be banished to this chemical reactor with a starting reservoir of delicious hydrochloric acid. The produced chloride shall be sent to the first electrolyzer to extract the chlorine, while the tungstic acid will be siphoned to the second electrolyzer to get the tungsten and hydrogen. All the hydrogen and chlorine will be pumped into the second chemical reactor to resynthesize my precious hydrochloric acid. And the tungsten will be trapped in this drawer for 1% of eternity. Which is still eternity. Now all that was left to do is dump the rest of the tungsten-containing ores into the ore processor to extract as much tungsten as humanly and inhumanly possible. Because I would need thousands of it. Now for the next phase of preparing for insane voltage technology. I used some tungsten to concoct the infamous tungsten steel for testing purposes, but I would also need insane voltage tier circuitry to supplement the insane voltage machinery. The only insane circuit unlocked at the moment were the mainframes, which were perhaps the most expensive circuit so far in the history of IGO by lots of names kind. Created from workstations from big integrated circuit with electronic parts and metal parts sprinkled on top. But not only was it necessary, I wanted to do it. Because this mainframe is a necessary ingredient for the extreme voltage circuit assembler, which shall open the gates for creating the next theme of circuits. Nanocircuits. So after several tetragrammatic amounts of steps of manufacturing circuitry from materials I already had, it was time to finally put together the mainframe. I finally put together the mainframe. What now? I used the mainframe and other assorted machine parts to left-click the extreme circuit assembler into existence. This was part of the evil plan to replace all high-voltage objects in the electronics production area, with extreme voltage objects. This also included a fluid extractor, laser engraver and cutting machine to go along with this. After demolishing all the old machines and old power grid, I undemolished, aka built, the new world order of extreme voltage electronic producing machines, which were all capable of creating nanocircuits for later purposes. And now that this was built, it was time to destroy it. Because it was time to actually begin the plan of moving the entire base to the space station. If you recalled from episode 7, the plan for the space station was to create several floors each with 4 quadrants dedicated to a specific industrial task, so that each quadrant had infinite room to expand on 2 sides as the factory grew. And each quadrant on each floor would be connected to a central power grid and matter energy system somewhere at the top of the station. So after using the dislocator to transdimensionally transport myself to the empty station, I began laying down the cables and marking the Y level of each floor, which would each be approximately 15 blocks apart, except for the distillation tower floor, which had to be much larger to fit in the planned oil distillation industrialization super-industrial complex of oil, which would be the 3rd highest floor. The 2nd highest floor would be power generation and the resource farm to feed the power generation, and the resource generation to feed the resource farm to feed the power generation. At the tippy top of this industrial mountain was the matter energy system. Anyways, it was time to go down. The 4th floor would be general purpose machines, blast furnaces, and chemistry area. The 5th floor would be the microverse and ore processing. And the 6th floor would be the infamous clean room. Previously I had also created Home Depot electronic diamond high voltage power unit super durable tools to assist with all the heavy work that needed to be done. And in order to move all of the storage drawers, I would need to use packing tape so that the drawers could be picked up without dropping all of their contents, which was what happened in the incident number 4. So now that the floors were planned, it was time to actually begin moving objects. It appears there has been a major change in plans. Rather than having actual floors, every machine line shall be floating to conserve on building materials. This has created a unique situation which can be referred to as Hypixel skyblock. Besides that, everything has been reconnected together once again to create a functioning space station. All of the machines were working as intended. And the matter energy system could still do tasks such as auto-crafting items. Except instead of appearing to be a station, it is actually a monstrous entanglement of agglomerated machinery and infused garbage, orbiting the Earth at a speed of 20,000 miles per hour. And this shall be our headquarters of gaming from now on. And the first decree I shall decree as ruler of International GregTech Station, I will invest into infinite water machine covers to supply water to certain machines, instead of using these inconveniently large water tanks. Each of these cost high-voltage pumps and advanced circuitry. But I was wealthy enough to the point that this was basically nothing. So I created a few and installed them simply by right-clicking on stuff, which had the side effect of giving infinite water. Next I shall set up an automatic sugar cane farm, which is still the main ingredient I have used to create plastic, which is still the main ingredient for basically everything important at this point. At first I almost refused to do this since it is impossible in real life for life to grow in outer space due to the lack of everything. But I decided to build it anyways due to one simple fact. Advanced rocketry is broken. This fact was proven to be a fact after I saw that my sugar cane farm design still grew sugar cane in outer space. As usual I used another vacuum to suction up all of the sugar cane. Disclaimer. Technically this shouldn't work because of the absence of pressure in outer space, meaning a vacuum would not make any difference. But I do not care. The next crucial ingredient for plastic was the sulfuric acid. But currently, the machines responsible for conceiving H2SO4 were still at pathetic low voltage. So I recreated the entire sulfuric acid production field at medium voltage. Which was barely any improvement, but good enough for me. With infinite water and sugar cane improved, it was time for another major improvement that will improve all improvements. The wireless terminal. This would allow me to access the matter energy system's contents at any location in Euclidean and Cartesian three-dimensional space. But this would need a security terminal, wireless connector, and wireless terminal, all of which needed extreme voltage equipment as well as blah blah blah. But do not fear. Because due to the hundreds of titanium and certain amounts of radon I had obtained previously, I already had everything I needed to make everything I needed for everything I needed. After just a few more short and simple steps, I created this brand new security terminal and wireless connector, both of which shall be placed next to the matter energy system. The wireless connector is upgraded by slapping on approximately some network boosters, which shall escalate the wireless radius to this rather high number. This brand new wireless terminal shall be linked to the system simply by dragging it into the security area, but this was not enough for the terminal. Because it needs electricity. So I imprisoned it for just a short amount of time in this charging station that I had ever since the second episode. Anyways, after waiting approximately 8 minutes I could finally test out this new toy. And it unsurprisingly worked. Gone were the days of flying up to the Matter Energy Center whenever I had to retrieve anything. Here were the days of retrieving anything at anywhere. The fourth sponsored industry improvement campaign I shall partake is the banning of crafting cards. This has been petitioned by various anti-crafting card lobbyists such as, but not limited to, basically everyone. Currently the crafting cards were used to send a request to the general-purpose machines to auto-craft certain materials, to be sent to the machine that is connected to the crafting card. But apparently these cards will ruin the TPS if they are used excessively. But how will I achieve anything without crafting cards? The answer is to automatically make stuff on location rather than having a crafting card order stuff from somewhere else. The first crafting card to annihilate was the one responsible for ordering copper foils to be made for circuit boards. This shall be replaced by having 2 bending machines that make foils automatically, with an export card automatically sending raw copper ingots to be bent. Speaking of circuit boards, if you recall, the production of these boards facilitated the consumption of iron the third chloride, which requires hydrochloric acid, which requires chlorine. This means chlorine is perhaps one of the most used chemicals thus far in the history of the Cenozoic geological era. Therefore, I would have to create a system capable of creating massive amounts of chlorine not only in the form of hydrochloric acid, but also in the form of pure chlorine, since that was needed for other purposes. So this is what I shall do. The main source of chlorine is salt and rock salt, also from salt, which I had a lot of. This could be separated by electrolysis in this electrolyzer. Half of the chlorine made would be stored in this tank for certain uses, while the other half shall be sent to this chemical reactor to create hydrochloric acid, using hydrogen from the hydrogen production area, which was basically just an electrolyzer splitting hydrogen from water. So now I had a source of both pure chlorine and hydrochloric acid for whatever purposes I could come up with. Now that I had renewed acid production, obtained wireless gaming, and driven crafting cars to extinction, it was time to re-begin the journey towards insane voltage. You may have remembered the tungsten steel, which is the main material for insane voltage. Smelting it would take immense quantities and qualities of energy and time. But this can be shortened by supplying helium to the blast furnace. And helium originates from the air, along with gaseous green argon and ridiculous amounts of nitrogen, both of which are needed for other crucial engineering tasks. In order to separate helium from the air we breathe, I would need one vacuum freezer to liquefy the air, and a rather massive distillation tower, which is constructed from stainless steel and aluminum. Luckily I had massive quantities of both from previous episodes. So all I had to do was to reshape them into material parts to be reconstructed into stainless steel casings, some of which would be expended to establish the distillation tower controller. Last but also least, I created some input and output hatches so I could put stuff in the tower and take stuff out of the tower. Next it was time to actually form the distillation tower. The bottom of this tower would contain the input hatch containing the fluid to be distilled, and each layer on top would contain exactly one output hatch for each different product of distillation. The tower was then covered with stainless steel. Then I constructed the trigonal trapezohedron vacuum freezer out of the aluminum casings. Now that I had the means to freeze and separate air, it was time to actually obtain air. Except we were orbiting approximately 1,000 kilometers above the exosphere. This is so sad. But it didn't have to be this sad. In order to transport air I would need to do trans-dimensional black magic. After contacting the voices in my head, I was told in return that there were two objects by the name of the Ender Tank and Ender Chest, which I made from several rudimentary objects. Not to be confused with the Ender Chest. Anyways, all of the Ender Tanks and chests with the same color code would share the same inventory even across dimensions. So theoretically I could transport diamonds to one of these chests, return to Earth, place down another chest, and access all the gaming diamonds. I would use these diamonds to power a new numismatic dynamo, which would power this brand new high voltage power grid, which would power this brand old air collector. The resulting commodified air would then be sucked into Ender Tank number 1. Meanwhile on the space station, I placed Ender Tank number 2 into existence, which contained all of the trans-dimensionally linked commodified air. Now all I had to do was pump the air into the refrigerator, which provided liquid air to be fractioned into the precious helium and argon and not so precious everything else. All of these rare gases would then be stored in these superfluid tanks for a long-term high-air hyper-volume super storage, which would be connected to the ME system to be integrated into the rest of this industrial complex station. Remember how approximately 3.09 minutes ago I said I would use helium to speed up making tungsten steel? This was true. But that was a lie this whole time. Because over the past few hours of preparation, I had already smelted enough tungsten steel in the background by now, to create the next tier of blast furnace coils, out of tungsten steel. With a maximum operational temperature of 4.5 thousand Kelvin, only 1000 degrees above the melting point of tungsten. But do not question this contradicting information, and return to being brainwashed by Greg Tech. 4.5 kilo-Kelvin was a temperature high enough to smelt Lumium, required for many different high-energy purposes, starting now. Luckily this Lumium also needed helium, so it was not useless this whole time. At first this may not look too complicated according to the chemical formulation. But mixing this alloy in the first place needed molten mana. which in reality is a mixture of 10 different objects ranging from snowballs to yellow fire to sulfur to blue fire to diamonds to gray fire to niter to blaze fire. All of this fire originates from these 4 different thermal blazes added by infamous mod thermal expansion. How could I possibly hope to get all this fire? Option 1 is turning on hard mode and grinding mobs for approximately 50 Bashiku matrix number of heat depth of the universe on planet Earth. Option 2 is using the deep mob learning farm. So I used option 2. In order to farm thermal stuff, I would need this thermal mob model, which needs approximately 1 thermal mob dust in the approximately first place. To get this, instead of going all the way down to Earth and spending 10 years locating 1 thermal blaze, I would instead use the chemistry method. Step 1. Spend mine coins to buy topaz. Step 2. Grind topaz. Step 3. Electrolyze topaz to get this extreme dangerous gas called fluorine. Step 4. Combine fluorine with hydrogen to get hydrofluoric acid. Step 700 billion. Turn hydrofluoric acid into elemental reduction liquid. Step 700 billion and 1. Dissolve rocks with this reducer to get 1, which is 1, dust. Finally I could create the first thermal model, which shall occasionally secrete the thermal pristine matter, to be converted into either the blaze, blitz, or basalt rod. Since one model gave 3 different products, I would use one simulation chamber to create all the pristine matter, which would be evenly split between 3 loot fabricators to evenly get the 3 different thermal rods. All of which can be grinded down to the fiery comminute I needed. Notable mention. I already had ridiculous amounts of blaze rods from technically farming blazes with the same system. The fiery comminute must then be turned into their respective fierier powder, with redstone, snowballs, saltpeter, obsidian dust, and sulfur. I already had sulfur and obsidian from annihilating the pillars in the end dimension. But snowballs and saltpeter would be grueling to farm. Just kidding. Snowballs were easily created by simply dumping dihydrogen monoxide into this self-explanatory fluid solidifier. What happened next should be self-explanatory. And saltpeter is created by reacting potassium with nitrogen and oxygen, both of which I controlled colossal aggregates of due to the air distillation plant. With all of these dusts and compounds and snowballs, I then did the 5 quadrillion step process of crafting everything together to obtain the mana dust. Now I could finally create Lumium. But wait, you might be saying at the screen on which you are viewing this broadcast, what about all of these random dusts that also constituted Lumium? And also this luminescence? But I was already 3 steps ahead of myself. I had created a system that automatically imports sulfuric acid and leftover apatite minerals to create phosphoric acid, which went to this mixer that had automatically imported glowstone, redstone, and aluminum, which automatically fabricated luminescence. As for the metal dusts needed to create Lumium, I had set up a new machine complex with 1 macerator per different type of metal ingot to be crushed, each with an export bus automatically dumping in a different metal to be sacrificed. This is so that I had at least 1 stack per useful metal dust on hold to be used, which was connected to the ME system so that they could be used by other connected machines. And these metal dusts were indeed used. I began mixing them together to create sterling silver and other blah 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 metals. The final odd object needed for Lumium was this energized clathrate, which was produced simply in a chemical reaction between quartz from glass and also molten glowstone. I then proceeded to take some luminescence and some liquefied mana dust, which when combined with the mixed thingies, would begin coalescing together, into the most unnecessarily complicated alloy I have created in the history of creating and history of alloys. Lumium. Meanwhile, with all the tungsten steel I had smelted in the background, along with some extraneous metallic objects, I assembled the tungsten steel coils in this mediumly new extreme voltage assembling machine I had created from spare titanium. But rather than replacing these nichrome coils with the tungsten steel ones, I would simply create a brand new blast furnace. The reasoning behind this is that this current blast furnace already used nitrogen to speed up smelting low-tier ingots. So in order to use helium instead to smelt medium-tier objects, I would need a new blast furnace. And I would use the new tungsten steel coils for the purposes of constructing this new prophesized furnace. I used the ME system to send helium from the super tanks into the brand new blast furnace, which I connected to the vacuum freezer as well so it could cool all of the newly smelted ingots. With this out of the way, I could now smelt my Lumium dust. Doing so caused the furnace to get overly enthusiastic, creating a glow so bright that I could not help but look at it for 4 seconds. Unfortunately, smelting a single Lumium would take 4 times 30 seconds, aka 120 seconds. And I would need massive amounts of Lumium for purposes that shall be purposified in the next episode, when all of this Lumium is done being created. I had gone from an advanced Earth base to a barbaric space station with a nominal national GDP of 128 tungsten steel and 100 helium. This would pale in comparison to my later doomsday plans, which involve creating NASA supercomputers in Minecraft. So goodbye. And shout out to the members of the past.